Hello and welcome to the second main event today of our European Union Week. I'm Joachim Henkel, Vice Dean of Research at TUM School of Management and one of the organizers of the European Union Week. It's a great pleasure for me to welcome my highly esteemed colleague Christoph as our speaker tonight. He will speak about the heritage of Robert Schuman, a very, very important figure for the European Union and for Europe as a whole. With a fascinating CV and, as you will see, a very strong impact on Europe. I had the opportunity to attend this talk in the past, and I've heard an earlier version of it, and it's both very informative and entertaining. Also, the speaker has a personal link insofar as both Schumann as also as Christoph are lawyers, but also our speaker has taught for 10 years at the Université Robert Schuman in Strasbourg. So the perfect person to speak about this very influential character, Robert Schuman. And with that, I hand over to Christoph. Christoph, thanks for being here, and the floor is yours.
It is a great pleasure. Thank you very much for your kind introduction, Joachim. First thing I should do, I guess, is I should share my screen, and I hope this is it. I think it is. I am in the, you should be able to see my, yeah, I think you should be able to see it. And if that's not the case, then I would greatly appreciate a hint by our kind, yes.
You see the screen, it works perfectly.
Excellent, excellent, very good. Now, everything that Joachim said is true. I am a lawyer, and from that angle, I am what in Germany is called, one would call a colleague of Robert Schumann's. Colleague is a term that lawyers start using for each other from, say, the second semester of their law studies, and then you remain that until the very end. But Robert Schuman also is, and in this case, it is admissible to also pronounce his name in German, because Robert Schuman, is one of the few people I know, not that I've met him, but I know, who are truly or were truly bicultural, not just bilingual, bicultural. Robert Schuman was a Frenchman, and he was also a German. His first loyalty, of course, was France, being a minister of in a number of French cabinets, French prime minister for a while. But by the same token, he could take the German perspective, not as one as that he would assume, but also from his personal experience in Germany. We'll get to that. Robert Schuman also is, let me say, one of my personal rock stars. Everyone, I guess, has his or her idols. And together, Robert Schuman is one of mine, together with Dietrich Bonhoeffer, because he is a man who had a vision, an idea of what was right and wrong and what was necessary, and he followed through with that. He didn't give in to political pressure. He didn't give in to considerations of opportunity. What might have furthered his career. Rather, he pursued the goal of his life, which was to end the arch enemyship as that had been cultivated probably on both sides of the Rhine, and to bring together the two nations, Germany and France. And I must say that I worked for the German embassy in Paris for a while, and l'amitié franco-allemande is not just a phrase. It is something that has become a reality. And I hope that this presentation, as one of the earlier sessions of our European Union Week, which, by the way, Joachim, let me say it again, it's a great project, and I'm very happy that you came up with the idea at TUM 5 years ago, I guess, that this is something that is worth remembering. And so this is also my little humble tribute to Robert Schumann, because his vision and legacy was peace as the European project's core. Europe is not about, and never was meant to be, about peaches and butter and agriculture. Rather, the European project always has been a peace project. And it has been incredibly successful because within Central Europe, we've had a period of peace and absence of any major conflict for a very long time now, two generations, if you count it generously, and if you count in 20 years, it's more than 3 generations. So that's the reason why I'm doing this, not because Robert Schumann is one of my research interests in the area of patents and trade secrets, simply because I want to, in a sense, bow my head. A great man, a truly great man. This is what I want to show you. Now, I hate these, but this is my little syllabus for today. First of all, I want to say a few things about La Lorraine Allemande in 1886, the year when Robert Schumann was born. He spent his school years in Luxembourg. He then went abroad, studied in Germany, came home, became an attorney in Metz, worked in the German administration in World War I, started his career in French politics, then in the German occupation, was interned by the Gestapo, joined the French resistance, the Résistance, rose politically in post-war France, and then did what we all now remember him for, which is his Schumanns Declaration. And of course, he's had a legacy, and that too I want to say a few words about. Let's start looking at history, which is always instructional. The German map and landscape was extremely complicated in the year of 1886. The German-French War of 1870-71 was 15 years had been ended or had ended 15 years ago. And as you can see, this was what, oops, I don't want that, this I want, what Germany looked like. The Kingdom of Bavaria, for example, where we are located in Munich here, also had a part, the Palatia region, where the Wittelsbacher, the German kings originally came from, had a part east of Karlsruhe, which now is the state of Rhineland-Palatia in Germany, or part of it. There was also, of course, was the Kingdom of Württemberg and the Grand Duchess of Bohemia. And then there was this area in the very west, which had been French for centuries, literally, even though the population had been German-speaking. And that territory had been, there had been a cession in the peace treaty of Frankfurt in 1872, I think. So as Germany had demanded, France gave that territory to Germany. The idea in Germany had been that this now was taken home, this territory. The truth of the matter was that people in what is now la Région Grand Est, which are the départements Haut-Alsace, Bas-Alsace, and Moselle, I think that's that all, were, I think, 3 départements, but it's the Région Grand Est now, that even though there were many people, many German native speakers, Albert Schweitzer being one, for example, from Kaisersberg, close to Colmar. Colmar, here on the map. That people weren't terribly thrilled. There is a very informative letter of a Prussian a civil servant in the Prussian Ministry of the Interior that wrote home utterly frustrated that while they were speaking German, still speaking German, they had lost every connection with the German fatherland, so to speak. They felt French. And the historical background is that this entire region, certainly the Alsace region, where I know this because I used to be a professor in Freiburg, before I came to Munich, the Alsace region voluntarily joined France because the conflict among the Reich cities had become so intense that they wanted a common governance that would end this time of conflict. So it's not that in this region people would be or felt that they wanted to come home. Rather, they felt French. Now, the family, the Schumann family, came from Metz. That's where Robert Schumann's father came from, and his mother. But he was originally had been from Luxembourg, but he was a French citizen he wanted to live in Metz. But anyway, and his mother was from the French-Luxembourg border, where Robert Schumann's grandfather, on the mother's side, had been a customs officer. So Robert Schumann knew what a border felt like. His grandfather had, in a sense, made a living of a border. At the same time, the border between the border between Luxembourg and the Prussian Rhine province did not exist as a border anymore, because they were part of the Northern German Customs Union that the Grand Duchess Luxembourg had joined the Northern German Customs Union, so that this German-Luxembourgish border did not exist anymore, had ceased to exist since the 1860s, 1864, I guess. And whereas the Luxembourgish French border had continued to exist much longer. And that was interesting for a young man who grew up in Luxembourg, as the city of Luxembourg, where he went to school. I think now we can sort of move on a bit. This is basically the same. So this border had ceased to exist for good, certainly. So it was kind of like the early European communities borders, where one still would show one's passport, but in the pre-Schengen area, where one still would show one's passport, but where one could move goods freely across the border. Whereas this Luxembourgish French border still existed. Now, the interesting thing was that Robert Schumann, being the son of a gentleman, of a father who had assumed German nationality by virtue of his coming from Lorraine, Lothringen, Deutsch Lothringen, as it was called, German Lorraine, Lorraine Allemande, was, I mean, you cannot say inherit, but he became a German citizen. The interesting thing is that at the time, and this is why it says here Reichsland, which means Reichsterritory, that Elsass-Lothringen, Alsace-Lorraine, was not a state under German law. It was part of the Reich, but it was Reichsterritory. It was not also a state territory. Just to explain what that means, if you were born here in, I think, Zweibrücken, for example, which is now Saarland, was part of the Kingdom of Bavaria. Two counties in Saarland were the so-called Saarpfalz, which Saar-Palatia. These people that lived here in that area were Bavarians and Germans. So there were Bavarian citizens, and also there were Reich citizens. So almost all Germans held, if you want, two citizenships, a Reich citizenship and a state citizenship. So you were a Reichsdeutscher, not a Reichsbürger, but a Reichsdeutscher. And also you were a Prussian, somebody from Württemberg, from a Bavarian, somebody from Hesse, and so on. Not so if you lived in Lorraine or in Alsace, because there you only were a Reichs citizen. Just as if you, for example, lived or were born in, say, one of the German colonies before World War I, German Southwest Africa or German East Africa, for example, or Togo, Cameroon. There were a few in Africa, not many, but a few. And that then depended on where your father was from, because a citizenship was passed on by the father. And if that father was Bavarian, you had Bavarian citizenship and German citizenship, basically sort of two layers, you could say. But people from the Reichsland only had one layer, and Robert Schuman was one of them. This, by the way, is the reason why until about 10 years ago, the German statute on citizenship was still called Reichs- und Staatsangehörigkeitsgesetz, Reichs and State Citizenship Statute. Okay. So Robert Schuman knew what nationality meant, but he also knew what identity meant, because while he was a German citizen, he nevertheless felt very Lorrainois, one could say, very much Lothringisch, as you would say in German. And what he did was he completed school in Luxembourg, got his baccalaureate, and at the same time, and afterwards, consecutively, he decided that he wanted to study in Germany. And so he went to Metz, to the Imperial Lycée, as it was called, Kaiserliches Lyzeum, in order to obtain the German Abitur, the German baccalaureate. The French bac, as we know, is granted after 12 years of school, the German Abitur after 13 years of school. He was the only pupil in his baccalaureate cohort that did that sacrificed the extra year in order to be able to attend university in Germany. University, as you know, in Germany, just as in France, used to be free, almost free. And so obtaining the German Abitur opened the doors of German universities for Robert Schuman. This is the house where the Schumanns lived. His parents and the entire family lived. As you can see, they obviously were a family of affluence. I mean, these were not poor folks. These were not rich, but well-off people, even though I don't know whether they owned the entire building. This is probably a plaque which says that Robert Schuman lived there. But he came from a fairly affluent background, was the only child, the only son. which played a role because only son meant that in World War I, down the road, he would not be drafted into combat troops where he could die, but got a privileged position in the how would you say in English? Étape. would sort of serve detached from the front line. Okay, now how did his student life look, or what did his student life look like? This is where he came from, Luxembourg. So the first thing that he did, he went to Bonn, not very far away. This is going to get more interesting than you think. So he went to Bonn and there joined a Catholic fraternity, we would say, Studentenverbindung Unitas, in the Catholic German Student Association. And the comradeship and the loyalty that he felt for his fraternity must have been really impressive, because at his funeral, there were two flags waved. One was the tricolore, the French flag, and also the flag of his student fraternity. Those were the only two flags that flew at Robert Schumann's funeral. Okay, so first he went to Bonn. From Bonn, he went to Berlin, up here. Berlin. From Berlin, he went to Munich, and from Munich, he went to Strasbourg. Something here went profoundly wrong, and I have no idea what it was. Let's see. I don't even see a chat. And I cannot even tell whether you're still hearing me. Excellent. So I'm online again. This is looking good. So I had talked about the reason why students were highly mobile. At the time, I mean, no Zoom existed, needless to say. So what students did was they would go to universities where you could hear certain famous professors. And that's exactly what Robert Schumann did. He went to Bonn first, then to Berlin, possibly because he wanted to hear Kohler, who was a very famous civil law professor from Offenburg, a little north of Freiburg, and then went to Munich, which not to this university, one must say, but to our esteemed colleagues on the other side of the, towards the east, let me say. LMU, and then he went to Strasbourg, where he wanted to take his his first state examination, which he did. So basically, when you look at the here, he started, went to Bonn, went to Berlin, went to Munich, and then went to Strasbourg. There we go, Strasbourg, and where he could take his first state examination, and then he started his legal internship. Upsala. I'm supposed to start the. That is kind of difficult now. What's on? Frankly, I cannot do this here. This could be it. Actually, I don't have any secret material there. Let me go back so we can, yes. Okay, so why did people make this big circle? Luxembourg, Bonn, Berlin, Munich, and Strasbourg? because he eventually wanted to become professionally active in the Reichsland Elsass-Lothringen, so the German Alsace and German Lorraine, to become an attorney. And in order to do that, he had to complete his mandatory internship that we still have, which is called Rechtsreferendariat. There was no real translation for that. It's used to be at the time an almost 3-year internship where you had to serve, and still do, it's only 2 years now, but where you had to work for a court of law, for a prosecutor's office, for administrative units, with an attorney, for an attorney. And then you would take your second state examination, which also would be the admission to the bar. And that then would make you completely professionally operational. Okay. And that's another important point I want to make. Robert Schumann, by having seen the Rhineland, Berlin, Munich, and also Colmar, in other words, having seen Prussia, the Rhine province, and also the center of Prussia, and the center, well, not the center, but the capital at least, of Bavaria, the second most important territory in the Reich, had obtained kind of a feeling for how Germany ticked. So Robert Schumann was, one could say, an expert on Germany among his fellow Lorrainois. This is how he looked. Interesting in sort of two ways. Firstly, how formal students looked and also behaved. They would be on a Z basis in the lecture hall. And they would be, and there you see sort of their attire, very formal. I mean, basically as if they were moving in a professional environment already. What this is, I must say, I'm not sure. I don't know. Could be something that's related to his fraternity. He's wearing a tie, and look on his face kind of has a nerdish element, I would say. Not somebody who, from today's perspective, we'd consider cool. But as you will see, this is going to change. What he then did, he came home, he became an attorney in Metz. Metz is the capital of the Lorraine region. Oops, no, I want it. This is Metz, in the very west of La Région Grand Est today. And he does so, another typical thing about Robert Schumann, he does so with two student friends, Georges Ditz and Edmond Moppat. When you look at these three names, Schumann, Ditz, Moppat, German surnames, not a question, but the first names, Georges, Edmond, Robert, first were French names, very typical for the region. And in Luxembourg still is. Jean-Claude Juncker, Jean Asselborn, and so on. So in this area, which is originally has been German speaking, people had German surnames and French first names. Very, very, very common, still is. And Schumann turned his, what Schumann did is he became prominent by organizing the Katholikentag 1913. 1913 was a very important year. You can, the last year before the First World War was a year in which culture blossomed, a year in which nobody could foresee the catastrophe that was going to follow with the First World War. There's a very good book on that. If you are interested, read it. Now, Katholikentag, the Catholic assembly, bilingual, so French and German in the German territory. And 80,000 people participate. 80,000. That is a huge number. I mean, just imagine how in 1913, transportation, for example, how difficult transportation was. People didn't have cars. People had bicycles. They had trains. They didn't have a pandemic, but they did have, but it was, I mean, a logistical challenge to get people to and from the site. So that he made a name by doing that. He also became a member of the city council in Metz. He also joined the Union Populaire, which is a classic centrist political party, comparable to the Union Populaire. There is these people's parties, as they are called, are also in the European Parliament. Basically, what today one would call the Christian Democratic Union, Zentrum in German. We don't have a Zentrum anymore, but they usually were sort of Catholic and moderates. And they became a major political force in Lothringen. And the good thing for Schumann was that because of his biculturalism, he had a very easy time relating to the French-speaking part of the population or the French-feeling part of the population. His mother was French, and at the same, so his French was good, and also he was bilingual. So he was as I had said initially, he was bilingual and also bicultural. Then came World War I. I had already said that Robert Schumann was relieved from conscription because he was the only son, and he also had physical problems, so he couldn't fully serve. He was recruited as a civilian, so he didn't wear uniform, in what was called a construction battalion, Armierungsbataillon, which basically was a technical support unit for the fortress of Metz, which was the strongest fortress that Imperial Germany had. The Imperial Germany had built that fortress in the western part of the Lorraine, Deutsch-Lothringen, in order to make a point that this territory was going to be defended. The interesting thing then follows, because in 1915, the president, Regierungspräsident, the president of a district, one could say, von Gemmingen. This is not, the of is wrong, should be von Gemmingen. I had a research associate look over it, and he, I think, overlooked that the guy was had a sort of a noble von before his name. Von Gemmingen transferred him to Boulay, to the district sort of headquarters. And what he did there was he administered sequestered goods. Now, what are sequestered goods? Sequestered goods are goods that were basically seized by the state for the war effort. So the German Reich in 1914 would ask farmers, for example, to supply horses to the army. And these were sequestered goods. Now, it was important to keep records of what people contributed so that they, for example, could be compensated later and so on. And he was particularly well suited for the job because he was a lawyer, and lots of legal questions were involved because basically the government was seizing the citizens' property, expropriating them. And so he was a lawyer, could deal with the legal questions, and he also was bilingual. So he could relate to the French as well as to the German citizens. By the way, the imperial administration in Reichsland Elsass-Lothringen was more flexible than people thought. First of all, they introduced the general school system in 1872, when in France such a system did not exist for everyone, which is expensive. I mean, you have to build the schools, you have to hire the teachers, and they let the French-speaking part of the population in peace. In other words, in their communities, publications would be in French, not in bilingual, but also in French, and schooling could be done in French. So grade school, certainly grade school, primary school, children were educated in French, which was a huge relief because otherwise the French speaking population would have been up in arms because they didn't know German. Probably this was meant as a transitory regime, but nevertheless, that was reasonably smart or humane, or however you want to call it. Now, this is how Robert Schumann looked like as a young professional. When you look at the face, he reminds me of my academic teacher, the sponsor of my habilitation. Similar guy. I think he radiates a certain intelligence, and he radiates something, an attention to detail. I could imagine this man to be a member of the tax administration, doing sort of tax audits, for example, and just pulling and pulling and pulling until he knew what really was happening. That's my spontaneous association when I look at that face. So he was maturing, you could say. His political positions or his position in French politics was, he was pro-clerical, so he was for the Catholic Church, which in France, with about the strongest, in 1989, the countries with the strongest division between state and church were the United States of America, France, and the Soviet Union. Being pro-clerical, defending the Catholic Church against attacks from especially the French left, was quite an endeavor, and was a politically courageous thing to do because because the Catholic Church, while almost everyone was Catholic, the Catholic Church in France was not terribly popular among politicians in the political sphere, let me say, in the classe politique. Secondly, he was pro-Alsace-Lorraine. So he always made sure that, yes, he was French, but he also was Lorraine. So he defended the identity of a country that after World War I, Georges Clemenceau had denied to even exist. Robert Schumann didn't care about that. He said, we are Lorraine, we have always been there, we'll always been there, and we're not going to let anybody take that away from us. He was pro-bilingual. So he advocated, after the Second World War, he advocated the right to use German. Quite an uphill battle. I mean, Germany had been the enemy in the First World War, and advocating that language, which was meant to be I mean, he did that for his fellow Lorraine and Alsatian citizens. But that was quite a political endeavor, and politically very risky, because the political adversary would point to him and say, there you go. And what language does he push? German. What he also tries to thrust upon us a relationship between church and state, German model. And then came the third point, pro-social insurance, which was built after the German model, because he had seen the reforms that Bismarck had implemented in Germany, created a social insurance scheme in order to basically dry out leftist parties. So there was a political motive behind that, but still, he said, it's a good thing. It's a good thing if everyone has health insurance. It's a good thing if everyone has is part of a pension scheme. It's a good thing if everyone is insured against unemployment. It's a good thing if there is a statutory insurance against accidents on the job. So yes, he probably was right. So and he was a member of the Christian trade union, Confédération Française des Travailleurs Chrétiens. That still exists. Not very many people in my little notes. I have the breakdown of the memberships of the French trade unions. CGT, for example, which is the communist trade union, one of the bigger ones, but no comparison to the German IG Metall, for example, or other of the big German trade unions. So that was his start. When you look at these positions, he didn't follow the political mainstream. He did what he thought was right. And if that had badly impacted his career, why should he worry? Another interesting thing that I must share with you is his connection, or the democratic, the seed, in a sense, of the democratic project in France. The Parti Démocratique Populaire under Marc Sangnier and an Italian priest, actually, by the name of Don Luigi Sturzo, they had, in a sense, drafted what a united Europe could look like. The French Foreign Minister Briand, the German Foreign Minister Stresemann, had already thought about reconciling France and Germany with, for example, a permanent seat for the German Reich in the League of Nations, and a memorandum for the United States of Europe. And in 1925, the Christian democratic parties, not just in Italy, but in also the centrist party in Germany, adopted this position. Interestingly, the European project, or the conceptual work towards a European project at that time, was headed by Italy. Don Sturzo, the priest, who, by the way, had to go into exile because he had become so difficult for the fascist Mussolini government to deal with, that the Catholic Church basically drove him into exile. They told him that he should leave the country, which he did. And for Sturzo at the time worked De Gasperi, who was one of the founding fathers of the European project. And the idea that they called Mercato Comune, common market. They had conferences in all states that were part of this, in France, in Italy, also in Germany. And the last conference was 1932, before the Nazi assumption of power, in Cologne. Now, guess who Cologne's Lord Mayor was at the time? Konrad Adenauer. So Robert Schuman and Konrad Adenauer knew each other, just as De Gasperi and Konrad Adenauer knew. These guys all knew each other. And these were the people who bore responsibility after the Second World War. Now, this all happened before the Second World War, actually before the Nazi time. But in the Second World War, Robert Schuman was interned in Neustadt an der Weinstraße, which is a little town outside. He had opposed the Nazi government to a degree that the head of the administration, the German head of the German administration, had to shield him from Gestapo prosecution because the Gestapo wanted to see him in a concentration camp. And the guy who was in charge of the German administration at the time, who later, by the way, became the minister president of Saarland, had him made it happen that he was interned. In other words, he lived in a bread and breakfast in where he was not incarcerated, but he couldn't leave it. He had to tell the kind of administration that they had where he was going. And one day he announced a trip to Strasbourg here. So he went to here to visit someone, and he had a very good justification because he had completed his first state examination there, his Referendarzeit there. So he had a close relationship with Strasbourg. And from there then went into the free zone, which was France Libre with the Vichy government, where Maréchal Pétain, by the way, the regiment commander of Charles de Gaulle, who had been a captain and a company commander under Pétain in the First World War, operated the government. So he basically went through, and he had help from friends from a lot of clergy. So from monks, for example, helped him and accommodated him in monasteries, and he had people who he walked a lot, and he had people who guided him and helped him. In November 1944, 6 months before the end of the Second World War, Robert Schuman joins the Mouvement Républicain Populaire, again populaire, another sort of people's party, the honorary president of which was Marc Sangnier. He had been sort of Schumann's former prime minister. And then he rose in these cabinets. So he had held positions with cabinet rank. And he, in 1947, even accepted being the prime minister under President Charles de Gaulle. And the two didn't get along very well. So he resolved a labor conflict, but in June of 1948, then resigned over issues of school funding. One of his projects, that how schools should be funded, that was important to him. And he had without hesitation, or at least from our perspective today, he didn't have any hesitation to sacrifice his political position, certainly, not his career, but his position. And between 1948 and 1953, Schumann served as French foreign minister in different governments. This is what he looked then. So in 1948, he made the title of Time magazine. And he does look at, this is probably a drawing, a picture that is flattering, but nevertheless, he looks smart. He's seen a lot. He has, he's a cool guy. And when you look at the background here, how France is stitched together and his face in the front, you know who has done the stitching in the eyes of Time magazine. Here are the two, Schumann and Adenauer. Adenauer's German, I think, Adenauer studied in Freiburg. So, but they both were members of student fraternities, Catholic student fraternities. They were both deeply Catholic, so they knew each other. I'm not sure whether they got along so well, but, and Adenauer certainly was not an easy type. Probably Schumann was the easier type, the smoother type, if you want. But they had a very good a base of communication. Both studied law in Germany at the same time. Adenauer was a little older, and so they had, and probably they also trusted each other reasonably. The problem that Adenauer had with Schumann was that Schumann, at some point, for a short while, had supported the Morgenthau Plan, which would have meant deindustrializing Germany and turning it into an agrarian state. And that Adenauer had taken personally. And in 1950, on the 9th of May 1950, which is on this very day, is it? Today is, oh, the 10th. Okay, on yesterday, it was exactly 70 years ago, Robert Schuman presented his Schumanns Declaration at a press conference at the Quai d'Orsay, which is the French Foreign Ministry. And he had informed Adenauer, but only a few hours before. The declaration was aimed at placing German and French coal and steel production, that's what you need to produce weapons, under one common high authority. That was located, by the way, in Luxembourg. It's at a big circle, and there is a plaque at the house. So if you're in Luxembourg, make sure you see it. It's really a historical building. And it was open for other countries, and Italy joined. So France, Germany, Italy, and Belgium, Netherlands, Luxembourg, Benelux joined. So 6 states. The 6 founding members. And on April the 18th, 1951, I mean, think about it. This was 6 years after the worst war that Europe had ever seen had ended, or has ever seen had ended. The 6 founding members signed the Treaty of Paris, creating the European Community of Steel and Coal, the first European community of 3. The ones to follow was Euratom and the European Economic Community that we all know. But the first one was the European Coal and Steel Community. And did we have a little more time, I would tell you why the European Economic Community was just a backup, you could say. This is what the European Community for Steel and Coal looked like. And when you look at it, there are 2 things that I cannot ask you, were we in the same room, I'd ask you, but, and these are the 2 things that come to mind. First of all, this was France. Algeria was not a French colony, was French motherland, so to speak, territory at the time. And then there is this little territory. What is that? This is Luxembourg. And this is Saarland, which was French occupied and which France was treating very well, founded the university, for example, and hoping that eventually the Saarland would vote to join France, which they didn't. In 1953, there was a referendum, and I think 10% of the population voted for staying with France, 90%. So that was the exact opposite to this region. This region had always felt foreign in Germany, whereas Saarland had always been German and did not feel foreign. Berlin, by the way, West Berlin, of course, was part of the European Community for Coal and Steel and Coal, whereas East Berlin was not, because it was part of the East Bloc. And that's Schumann's grave. He never made it president of the French Republic, that some people said he would have been, but he remained exposed to the suspicion that he was not as French as he said he was, but that he was deep, deep down inside, he was German. And in a sense, that was not entirely wrong. What was wrong, though, was where his loyalty lay. He said, it's in our French interest to reach reconciliation with Germany, because if we don't do that, there may be other wars, and therefore we must join forces with Germany. And that's what the European project has done. And the European project, let me say again, I said that before, the European project is a peace project, has always been a peace project. It's not about people, it's not about German exports, and it's not about regulating agriculture. It's about keeping peace in Central Europe and diffusing what for a long time had paralyzed Europe, which was the arch enemyship between Germany and France. And I think that that has succeeded. And that's the reason why all of my 3 kids have learned French at school, and why 5 years ago I started this talk in French. I decided that I wasn't going to do that in a situation where you could just easily drop out in a lecture hall. That's kind of a little more difficult. But this is Robert Schumann was an amazing man, and that's why he has always been and will always be one of my personal rock stars. Thank you very much.